Unmuted mit Elton
und Dodo, unser Podcast von und mit Frauen aus der IT. Wir interviewen heute Lucero. Lucero ist ein Communication Coach und wir werden diese Folge heute in Englisch machen. Deswegen würde ich jetzt mal switchen. Hi, welcome to our podcast, this time in English. Welcome, Lucero. So happy that you're here. And as always, we're going to start with a short introduction question, and then we're going to do a full introduction of yourself. And the introduction question of today will be, who is the person that influenced you the most throughout the last 5 years?
Wow, that's a tough one. 5 years.
You can also do your whole life.
Okay. Because I thought, whole life, I've been asked this question before, and it may sound cliche, but it has to be my mother. The way she deals with people, I think the older I get, the more I think about her relationships, how gregarious she is, and how she's managed to just, wherever she goes, walking in a shop or walking the dog, she manages to strike up a conversation and people just absolutely fall in love with her. So there is something there around her communication, but I think it's just her sense of being. And I try to emulate that as I think about her, how she's dealt with life. She was a teacher, ended up being a stay-at-home mom. Her generation was like, you get married, you stop working. And I think she regrets it, but I have an older brother, so she's raised, 2 amazing children. And all kudos to her. I think she did most of the grunt work. I just look at her, look at what she accomplished, look at how she raised the family and the way she is generally. And I just think, she's just this person that you look at and you speak to, and it's like, I want to be that way and think about things that way and think about relationships that way, because it's not much of an effort. It's just how you deal with people. So I think that's just something that I always think about when things get tough or serious, or we're in this business setting. So that's who I would say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think if I think about my whole life, it's a bit of a similar answer because it's also my mother. And next to my mother, it's my bigger sister because she's 7 years older than me and she was kind of my second mother. And they both influenced me a lot. And I think if I think about the last 5 years, it's not really a person. I mean, it's kind of myself because I had to struggle with depression a lot. So that actually influenced me a lot because I worked a lot on myself and went to a therapist and stuff. So I think the last 5 years, it was actually me teaching me a lot about myself, where I have to take care and work on myself. Yeah. What about you, Doreen?
Yeah, I think for life, it would also be my mom or my grandmother. I mean, I got a lot of traits from them too, good and bad ones. So I think that's the most common answer. And for the last 5 years, so Ellen and I worked together before. And the person who got me the job, which is called Felix, he, I think, was like, because he started my career and he like really put a lot of effort in the fact that where I started, and that kind of like influenced my whole journey. So we're not in very close contact right now, but that was just how I got my first job, I think, influenced a lot where I am now.
True. Felix Müller, right? Greetings.
Shout out. Hi, Lucero. Thanks for joining us. You're a communication coach, and Ellen actually did a communication training with you, and that's why you're here today, and that's why you're interviewing with us. You worked for Google and are a leading communication coach, and you are the founder of PitchNinjas, who is a consultancy on communication coaching, and we're excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. So lovely invitation when I got the message, especially Ellen, as we worked with you. So no better, I think, way to be here and hear you and also share my story because you've experienced the process. So I don't have to sell it as much. It's not that I'm here to sell it, but no, here to, I guess, tell my story. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Do you want to jump right into your story and how you became the founder of PitchNinjas?
Yeah, sure. So, Doreen, as you mentioned, I worked with Google for 16 years. I am a business psychologist by trade. So that's what I studied in university and I mastered in it. Then did a couple jobs, joined Google, and basically kind of did the whole journey of learning and development with them, from recruitment to program building to coaching to leadership to being a business partner to tech and sales. So it was quite a long journey, but within that journey, obviously learned along the way. The last 6 years of that, I really started to focus on startups and founders through some programs and accelerators that we had within Google. And then I found that my passion, and I was determined to find a full-time role. I was thinking VC routes, just to impart my people strategy knowledge on them, coaching them, because that's what I found within the last 6 years of doing sort of this kind of volunteering type work with them. They just inspired me, founders in general, their stories, their ideas. And I always thought, you know what, one day I'm going to have an idea. I want to be a founder. I know it's a lot of work. I mean, I wasn't sort of blind to the fact that everything, sometimes what you see in social media is, all these great stories, raises and, exiting and, millions of dollars of business. There is that glamour to it, but in reality, it's quite different, right? And any founder will tell you that. So I think the idea, as I had millions of ideas, and some I would see in newspapers like later on, and I'm like, I had that idea, but of course I didn't execute. But this one came about because through COVID, I started to see within communication, especially while I was working at Google, just people wanting more help and not knowing where to go. And if there were workshops run by the organization, it was few and far between. They would be oversubscribed. People would bring people outside from the business in. And that just triggered my thinking of, why is it that so many people are attracted to these types of workshop? And these would be like communication 101, how to tell your story, how to speak in public, different topics, but very basic. And it would just be, hundreds of people coming in, asking questions. They can't be answered. People go back to their desk and then they just have to get on with it. And I don't want to say I suffered this, but I certainly was early in my career, sort of in a position of not knowing what to do. As a child, I was extremely shy. I, would hate to speak in public in university. I did all sorts of tricks. Nothing worked. I would just not volunteer. Joining the corporate world, I would get feedback. Why don't you speak in meetings? Why don't you raise your voice? Why don't we hear from you? And that made me more nervous, more anxious. And then it was just learning by doing. And I thought, you know what? It doesn't have to be this way. Why do only senior executives, if it's not a workshop for lower, tier people, the senior ones would get a coach to come in and help them with their speaking, with their whatever it was regarding communication, and the company would pay for it. So I was like, oh, that's very elitist. Why is it them that get it, but nobody else gets it unless you were sort of some top talent? So therefore, the idea was born, I remember perfectly, it was just kind of right in Jan 2020. And it was, okay, there has to be a better way to make it affordable, accessible, to make it, so that people at the touch of a button get the help that they need when they need it the most. And they don't have to pay astronomical amounts of money to be able to access a coach that can help them move the needle, get to where they want to be, whatever goal they have in mind, even if it's a simple, can I just get better talking to my partner or my friend, even as simple as I'm an introvert and I just don't find it easy to speak to like big TED Talks. Yeah. So that's how it was born. And then we went full throttle.
That's so nice.
Very, very happy that you found it, because I was taking part in this mentor development program by Google. It's one of these programs organized by women tech makers. And actually, I didn't know upfront that PitchNinjas would be part of it, but I was really happy because we had the possibility to sign up to a PitchNinjas training, which included 3 sessions. And to apply, you just had to take a video of yourself answering a couple of questions, and then a coach would come back to you. And yeah, I just decided, why not? Because I'm doing public speaking, but I don't love it. I actually hated it once. Right now, I'm okay with it, but I don't enjoy doing it. So I actually thought, yeah, why not? Maybe I can learn a bit more and try to enjoy it more. So I just signed up for it. And I think it was pretty awesome because we all didn't have to pay anything for it, but we got a lot out of it.
And what would you say, what were like the top things that you got out of it? Like, what did it really help if you?
I think one thing that I wanted to work on, we didn't touch that much because when I'm getting nervous, my voice starts to shake, and there weren't that many possibilities to train it because the situation that we had didn't make me nervous. I found it very impressive that by changing small things, you can influence the message that you want to transfer a lot. So you can really make it stick into people's minds by not changing much. So for me, it was these no-brainers that you can apply, especially in a remote setting, that really improve how your people listen to you and how much they take away from what you say. Although what you say is still the same, you just say it differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you give us a few examples of what you learned and how, like what you learned in training, what tips they gave you, and what are the small things that we should look out for?
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, my speaking or the way how I present things is already kind of good. I use natural language. I try to make complex things easy to understand and to follow. And I also played around with a bit of storytelling before. So I think my baseline was already kind of okay-ish. Okay, kind of good. I kind of good. And then the small thing, so it was a very spontaneous decision to take this video from myself. So my setting was just the setting that I use right now. I used my phone, and then it's easy things. So you should, for example, take care of that you have enough space on top of your head. Like I always try to make it a hand width, and that your belly is kind of visible. And then, so this is actually something you can change. And then there is something they call the power pose that just gets you like, oh, I'm having really vocabulary issues today.
Like grounded. So like,
yeah, exactly.
Like stand up or you ground your feet. Yeah, whatever works for you.
Yeah, it actually changes something. You slide to the tip of your chair normally, put your feet on flat ground, and you can also position your hand on your legs. If you are sitting like that, like having your head laid in your hand, it's a completely different energy. And by changing to this power pose, it's giving you a completely different mood. And yeah, maybe people who listen to us, just try it in the next meeting and try to sit in this power pose. And then one thing that actually had most influence on me was using your hands. So engage with your hands, because I never did that. I'm doing that if I'm talking to someone when I'm face to face, but I never ever used them when I was in a remote setting. And I actually realized that people using their hands, I mean, it doesn't have to be like huge gestures, but just using them a bit and engaging and underlining what you say. If someone else that I'm talking to is using their hands, I'm feeling way more engaged. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something you can train easily. And it changes a lot the way that people are listening.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Lucero, do you want to jump in and give us more of your thoughts on it, what you find especially important in terms of communication, and add on what Ellen just said?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Ellen, I love that you mentioned sort of just like the setting, as basic as sometimes we forget like our setting and how we're, where we are in the camera, your background, I love the sort of the hand rights and just thinking about that, because now we're in a virtual world for the most part, for most of you, I suppose, or a hybrid setting. And so it's always just interesting to think about, love the hand gestures. I'm a talker. I tend to do too much of this. And so I've actually, with the power pose, I normally stand. So I'm standing right now. I feel that projects my voice more, because I tend to sit. If I sit, I tend to slouch. I know that I'm this person that just kind of, because I want to like get into the camera, almost have a conversation. And so I find myself going so in that then I'm like kind of doing this. And I've just noticed that that's my natural tendency, even standing. Like I'm always like, put my shoulder back. But I find standing, that it brings out that voice. I think that's really important in communication. We don't talk about voice, this sort of, mechanism that we have, the tool. and how do you use it to your advantage? And I mean, I love, Ellen, that you said like your voice shakes if you're doing public speaking. We all have something, right? It could be the voice shaking, the dry mouth. I tend to get that when you said have a glass of water. Like if I'm presenting to 200 or whatever audience it is, I then start to get a dry mouth, and so having a glass of water, taking a pause, drinking, it's okay. The silence, right, is okay. I know sometimes people fear it, that awkward silence, but it's actually quite powerful.
True. You just have to be able to stand the silence. I think that would be my problem.
Literally over the holidays, I read an interesting article that said, so if you are presenting and you're getting up on a stage or, be it in a room, that it's super powerful just to come up and take a moment and don't speak straight away and sort of introduce yourself and get all like, because you might be nervous, but just stand for like 1 to 2 seconds, just getting the audience to look at you. And they're anticipating, right, what you're going to say, who you are, introduction, whatever it may be, storytelling. And it's kind of this moment of, I can't wait what he or she has to say. And so I say that that's very powerful in terms of you coming up. And I haven't tried this like consciously, but it is something, again, it could be awkward, right? Because you're like, what are these people are staring at me? But it's actually quite powerful. So
true. I have one more tip that adds up to that. So my coach, Henry, he's an actor. And he said that at the beginning of a presentation, you can, for example, use 2 seconds of silence, but you should also take care of the pace in your sentence, in your very first sentences, because that sets the tone of the whole presentation.
100%, like even more than that. So because what tends to happen if you're nervous is you speak quicker. We all do this. I do this. You start to speak, and because you speak, and for people, it's hard if English is not their first language. And so just pacing yourself. So that's great, right? We talked about voice, we talked about pace, we talked about tone. So the voice, right? How high, how, you might want to speak a little bit louder if that's not natural to you. I know sometimes women, we tend to speak softer, and then speaking loud is like, oh my God, am I screaming? Am I shouting? Well, no, it's not like you're yelling, but it may be just forcing yourself to speak that much. That's, a couple of notches up, especially if you're in a big setting. And I guess you might have a microphone or not, but if not, just that's a tip as well. So it's really like communicating authentically is something I always say as well, because we have clients come and it's not like, we're going to make you into this sort of Obama character or TED speaker if, that's not the route you want to go. And that's not the point. Or people always sometimes tell us, can you get rid of the nerves? I need help. No, we're not going to get rid of your nerves. That's a natural human tendency, elements that will be with most people. Even the best speakers have butterflies in their stomach or maybe sweaty palms. The heart rate goes a little bit more as soon as they get into that meeting or whatever it may be. So it's how to use those nerves to your advantage, like in a positive way rather than hindering you, is what we could work on rather than eliminate all this, these things that people think, oh, by getting some coaching, you're going to eliminate. No, that's not the point. Or you're going to make me become this amazing, super, whatever it may be. Well, yeah, if that's your goal, we'll try really hard. But
although I think just as an add-on, it's not getting rid of the nervousness, but I think getting comfortable with all the other parts, like talking to other people, standing on a stage, having a presentation. I think that actually helps with dealing with the nervousness in a more positive way, and to actually use it in a positive way.
Yeah, and it's self-confidence as well. I think we sometimes lack that confidence that we just, and these are the voices that we have in our head. And I think that's really important. Like, what do we tell ourselves? We're our own worst critics, right? Whenever I have to speak, I'm like, oh, I totally messed that up. And then you ask some friendly person in the audience, you were amazing. And it's like, no, I wasn't. Yes, you were. And then you just kind of beat yourself up about it, but for no reason, right? Because we thought this. So that's also maybe something to think about, is like, what are you telling yourself, and is it valid or not? And is there a friendly person in the audience in the meeting that you can just, do you mind just observing me, and I, bring me some feedback after, as in a friendly way is also a good idea.
True.
Yeah, I think that's the most important. Also with being on stage and then waiting a few seconds, I feel so awkward, like with the silence. Like I even sometimes feel that it's too long if I drink a sip of water, which is not the case. It's only in my head that I think, oh, this is too long. This is awkward now. But it isn't. It wouldn't be.
Yeah.
One more point about observing yourself, because I found that video that we had to take in the beginning very interesting, because the first thing that we did in the first session was to watch that with video again, first without audio and the second time with audio. And watching a video of yourself without audio is really awkward, and you had to answer some questions. Do you believe them? Does anything disturb you? Does anything surprise you? And I think I could recommend everyone take a video of yourself and watch it without tone. I think it makes you aware of things that you do that you would normally not be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, then 100%, like that's why we designed it in that way. And that's the first thing you have to do, which I know puts some people off. Like we've had people just not go through the process because they're like, there's no possible way I can do this. When in reality, it's super powerful, like you said, Ellen. And, you don't get to record yourself 100 times to make it perfect. We want to just see you as you are, because that's the best way to be able to give you tips. And how do you feel about it? How do you feel looking at this person sort of as a third party, and you have to observe this person when you say no sound and all that. What do they look like to you? And then you're sort of going, oh, this, that, and the other. And so it's very revealing. It is cringeworthy, even to this day. Sometimes I watch my recordings of things that I've, done in the past, or presentations, or even this podcast. If I have to watch myself again, it's like, oh, here I go.
We only record the audio, not the video. Don't worry.
Oh, well, I didn't know that. So yes, so those are the things, right? And even recording just voice, you can actually learn a lot by just how you talk. And do you interrupt? Do you listen? What are the pauses like? How's your voice? Did you get excited in some areas and then it kind of flattened out? So there's lots to tell there.
Yeah. In a podcast, what are the words you use most often? There are words I use so often, and it's so annoying when I cut it. Then I'm like, oh, again?
Yeah. What would you say are the most important aspects of communication?
I think I referenced a few. So the authenticity, speaking, communicating in your authentic self. So not emulating this person you have next to you as if it's a colleague or this, celebrity, whatever it may be, who you are. And I think there's a bit of self-awareness there. Like an exercise we always tell our clients, or some of them, is if they're a bit unsure in terms of confidence and authenticity, is, just on a piece of paper, put down all the strengths that you have. And if you get stuck, it could be like if you're in a role at work, you've had reviews before, 360s, what have people said? Look through sort of that historical data. Ask a partner, ask a friend, what do you love about me? What's great? Be honest, be truthful. And, you get data that way. And just list it on a piece of paper and look at that list and look at how great, you are and the skills that you have. And then just have those. I have some of those just posted, in front of me sometimes, just to remind myself. So, that's just a good exercise if you're willing to do it. There's also speaking clearly.
What's on one of your post-its?
Perseverance, tenacity. Like if you're telling me no with like no data, I go in and I'm like, no is not no, but we can do it this way or that way. And, there are possibilities. There's a solution for everything. So I tend to get really inspired by, okay, if it's a no for obvious reasons, okay. But if it's like, oh, I'm not sure without like the data, the facts, I'm like, well, maybe there's a way and why. And so I have that a lot. I've been told that over and over. And so I kind of just, again, use it to my advantage in a respectful way. Obviously, if we're dealing with business clients and trying to sign contracts, I'm not like going to be pushing forever if it's a no, but reminding myself of the strengths that I have. So I think that's good for us to just have top of mind and ask for feedback from your closest people you work with, even you, Ellen, Doreen, having that little exercise. What's so great? What do you love? Working together? What could I do more of, less of? It's always good. to help. So that's the authenticity, the clearly, the concisely. And then, communication is verbal, nonverbal. And then there's this paraverbal, which maybe people don't know. And that's, the verbal is the words that we choose. The paraverbal messaging is very much about how we say those words. So we talked about tone. We talked about, fast, the speed, pausing. And then you've got the nonverbal messaging, which is very much the body language. We talked about the hands, the eye contact, especially if you're in a sort of a live one-on-one setting. It tells you a lot. The leaning in, it's much easier to kind of get a sense of the person if you're live with them as opposed to video. But you still can get some of that body language based on what we spoke about, how people are moving themselves about. You do notice sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed when people are like, browsing on their phone and they're trying to listen, but they put their head down, something's going on, right? When they're like, oh yeah, so something's going on down there, or they've got tabs up and they're just kind of distracted. They're kind of looking around. So you can see that. And then it's distracting if you're speaking to them going, oh, is everything okay? And then they'll be like, oh yeah.
Yeah, that's also why I don't know, I often have multiple tabs open, and sometimes I have them to really follow the meeting or something. And that's actually something I say or explain in my mentoring sessions, for example. Hey, if I'm looking over here, I'm looking at my notes, I'm not like being distracted and stuff, because that's just important for how the person is feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Because, we all start to make, we speculate and we're going, she's looking at her screen. She's not interested in what I'm saying. And so then you get self-doubt.
Exactly.
Get it out there clearly as possible.
Yeah. We have notes open, by the way.
It's not distracting. We're in the conversation. So I'm not going like, oh, what's next?
Maybe on the next point, you touched a bit on this already, but do you also do training, or do you also have tips on how to get a message across, and not just maybe getting it across, but also being assertive, maybe convincing someone as well? So do you have any thoughts on this?
The first thing I think about in terms of getting a message across is like, what is my setting and what is the sort of environment around me where I need to get this message across? And by that, I mean, am I in a meeting and I'm pitching to a client? And so, okay, yes. And so what do I want the outcome to be? So what do they need to hear? What is my message going to be? What do I want the outcome to be? And so then I structure the conversation, if it's a half-hour meeting where I know I'm going to be pitching to a client or services, I start to think about those questions in advance to help me structure the message concisely and clearly so that I don't get myself in a muddle and ramble. So again, knowing a little bit about yourself, like I can talk and talk and talk, but I can, go off on tangents, and then I'm like, oh my God, bringing it back. So how can I be more clear and concise to get that message, to then give time for them, to ask questions and scope a little bit more about what the situation is in their organization. So that's just an example of me going into a pitch. Then there are sort of things like, more casual things, if I'm meeting my team members. But I think the same process is, what is it that I want to get across? We have this much time. What's the purpose? Is it just catching up? Is it, strategy? Is it OKRs? How are we doing? How are we tracking sales? So the same exercise applies to be able to get that message across so that, we all know what we're here to do, but I feel comfortable that I accomplished what I needed to. So there's a little bit of thought process that I would recommend doing in advance, unless, again, you're just kind of getting together and having fun. You don't necessarily need to think so thoroughly about that. But I think that's a big thing. We talked about pacing yourself. We talked about, your intonation. We talked about thinking about your tone. I think I won't repeat that, but I think that's very important in terms of how you get your message across. Structuring perhaps is, kind of beginning, middle, and end is, if people like, frameworks who are listening, I think that's also really good in terms of your messaging. So we're introducing the topic, you're establishing what information is going to be shared at the beginning. You're then filling in the details to the listeners, to whoever's in front of you. And then ending is, finishing as to why or the reason that you're communicating what you're communicating, and then letting the other person respond or, giving them airtime as well, I think is important. Mm-hmm. So those are sort of key areas. in terms of getting your message across.
Yeah, and maybe one addition that I just remembered from the Women Tech Makers Academy. I mean, it's also important if you want to explain something technical or a bit more complex to make it easy to follow. And even if there was one example about having presentations to a mixed audience that are on different levels.
Mm-hmm.
It might be that you get in a depth where they can just not follow because they don't have the background, but you also don't have the time to give them all the context, because then you lose the people that already have a lot of knowledge in technology, for example. One thing you can do is zoom out, zoom in, and zoom out again. So to just give an overview, explain the details, and then zoom out again to really get the others in line as well that you lost on the way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that I found very helpful for technical presentations, for example.
Yeah, and great point. And it goes back to, you make me think about who's in front of you. And so the more data you have, to your point, if it's a room that's mixed, then catering your messaging to the people that are not technically focused, or that's not their area of expertise. And, avoid using acronyms could be a great one just off the start, because maybe the technical folks would understand those acronyms. So how can you make it very sort of standard for everyone? But I love the zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, because that's also really helpful. And then that's kind of subject matter experts and audience. We get this a lot with our clients, because we do work with a lot of tech clients, and getting them to explain things to a non-tech audience is a big one.
Yeah.
You mentioned assertiveness, and I didn't answer that question. So just really quickly on assertiveness, I think this is you might have experience. I certainly did in the corporate world, especially women, and assertiveness, and that being misconstrued for aggression, or just having a loud voice, or being annoying. And these are just all these stereotypes that are in the workplace, and maybe some are better than others. So I think it's important to call out that doesn't mean that you're being aggressive. I feel like assertiveness is being comfortable in your own skin, being comfortable that you have a voice to call out things. And, if you're in a setting, in a meeting, and saying, oh, I disagree with that, because in a respectful way, right? You're not trying to create confrontation, but you're confident in you saying what you need to say, and then gathering that feedback and having a conversation. So I think it's important to just think about that in terms of how do you become more assertive, and just kind of detaching that, especially if you feel that, oh, if I speak up a bit more, that means I'm this, that, or the other, or people in my organization have been called this, that, or the other. It's being comfortable in that skin, and being okay to disagree, not being afraid to disagree. And then, it also encompasses the eye contact, the body language, the getting comfortable saying no, watching your emotions, how you react to things. Great point that you can't control everything. So I think that's really important. Or you can't control others. And just really thinking about how you express yourself. What situations are you in? Low risk, high risk. I think it's important as well, as you think about how you communicate, and then confidently. But with that, it gives assertiveness. It gives you sort of, I know what I'm saying. And even if I doubt what I'm saying, you could also raise it like, I'm not so sure about this, but I'd like to call it out, and I'd love to hear your feedback. So that's a way to say, you're expressing, you might not be fully confident, but you just kind of want to create a conversation. And that's being assertive. I don't know what you guys think about assertiveness and how you've experienced assertiveness.
I feel like with time, I'm getting more assertive, and I'm also like, I can rely on what I learned in the past. So especially in terms of my in job contexts or things like that, I think I got more assertive because I have the courage to, because I can rely on what I know and what I learned in the last years.
Yeah.
For me, it's actually not the opposite, but a bit different, because now in the past, and when I was younger, I always had the feeling that I have to be assertive, and I tried really, really hard. And I had the feeling that I want people to take me seriously and value my opinions. And now that actually my opinions are more, I don't want to say valid, but I do have now more experience, and now it's not as important anymore for me that people actually, because I now know my value more, And I don't have to convince anyone that much anymore that I'm great or that I know things. I can just say, okay, this is my opinion. And then the person can decide to believe me or not. But it's not that, oh, I have to convince you that this is the right way now.
Yeah.
And I think that by that, you get more assertive completely on a natural way.
Yeah.
And I think it takes time, unless I think right now what I'm seeing in younger people is that they have more of that. I mean, I see my 12-year-old daughter, and I mean, she just blows my mind. I'm like, where at your age, I was like, like behind the skirt of my mother. How are you so assertive and confident? And, it's not that I ask her that, but I see it and I'm just blown away. And I'm like, this generation of like, well, no, it's not like that. Or I don't think that was right. So I left that situation, and it's what I think, what I believe. And it's not about them. It's about me. And it's, in these sort of context where you're not giving into something. And I'm like, and I see that with, the 20-year-olds and even like, early 30s. And it's just fascinating, right? How, if you get that, you learn that, or you kind of implement that at a young age, it just gets all that better, right? And less sort of these stereotypes where you have a voice in women. And I think that's just kind of sometimes older generations, right, that are still learning. But I love it that at such a young age, you start to create that confidence and are strong, right? You feel sure about your voice and what you have to say. I just find it amazing.
Yeah. And I kind of have the feeling that everyone starts with being confident. And then sometimes in your like early development stage in school or maybe in high school, there is something that makes you become shy. So I actually had that like when I was in, I think 11th grade or something. I started getting nervous when I had to read out loud. And I don't know why, but somewhere in my teenage time, something took away this Urvertrauen. I don't know if there's an English word for like this confidence that is just there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's also a topic of how women are raised, but I would never be able to pinpoint something like you said this and that to me, and that's why I was insecure.
Say like normally it's like some situation where someone said something to you, a teacher or a parent or a close friend that you lost because they said something, or a close relationship that kind of got you off balance. And then you just kind of reverted to this way, if you can't sort of pinpoint, that's, something interesting, right? I mean, I live with this from a very young age. I was very shy. And so it just kind of grew with me. So there wasn't a particular situation. It's just how I was raised that got me to this point of like not being able to say anything. But I guess it's interesting to acknowledge because there's always going to be knockbacks. I feel like as you go through, especially as a child, teenager, you are going to have these knockbacks. It's then how do you get up from them? And, that's a whole sort of resilience area, a topic of conversation in terms of getting back up. And, because there's going to be highs and lows. It's not always going to be plain sailing.
Yeah, that's a nice picture.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is in general a difference in how women communicate? I mean, you touched the topic already a little bit by saying that women are sometimes perceived as annoying or loud if they are communicating in this or that way. So do you think that there are differences, and how can one handle these prejudices? So how could I communicate better to not being judged that way?
Men, women, you will read the literature. There are differences. It's been researched. It's been written about. I mean, what we've seen from a client perspective, from what I saw in the corporate world, from what I've seen in tech founders, good sort of different sorts of populations, different age ranges. Sort of, if I were to summarize it, a lot of the times it comes to this lack of confidence that we tell ourselves, which kind of gets tied into imposter syndrome at some point. I mean, I struggle with that at times if I'm speaking to a big client. And then, I'm getting into that meeting and I'm like, I don't think I've got it. And so I just kind of smack myself and say, no, look at everything I've done, right? So it's kind of these techniques that we can talk about in a minute. But I've seen this sort of lack of confidence. And I mean, use Ellen in the mentor programs, that you were on, that I also did with another group. It's, we were talking about them and the strengths exercise. And then at some point, I remember our coaches, going through their LinkedIn because they connected with their clients. And a lot of them came back to me and said, oh my God, if you looked at their LinkedIn profile and the things that these women are accomplishing, and be it tech and data scientists and all this great stuff, it's amazing of the skill set that they have. And it's surprising how they lack the confidence to speak up or to have that voice at the table, or, as simple as we've had clients where it's been difficult for them to speak a bit louder. Yes, but, ask for that raise or that promotion because they don't want to, a lot of times, kind of bother people or, be seen as this. So it's a lot of these things that are, kind of things that are stuck in their heads or things that they've observed in their environment, because so-and-so this happened to them. So I'm not going to ask for a raise because I'm going to be seen, or I'm not going to, I had this at Google, a really, really, really strong example of this lady that I was managing who was a very strong voice and like really said great things about how things should be better or that policy is not so great. And in a way, she was shut down and, perceived as, oh, here she comes again. It's problematic. And, it's kind of like they didn't say it explicitly, but you could see she was struggling and she eventually left, not because of that, but because of a ton of other stuff. But that was a big part of it. And so, that just then makes people go, oh, we're not going to speak up because it's not going to go anywhere. We're going to be perceived as this. And so the culture kind of shifted into, I'm just going to stay quiet. I'm just going to do my job, get paid at the end of the month. And there we go. And so then you can see how that just perpetuates across because of what people see and experience. So, yeah, so if I were to sum it up, it would be those elements of, it starts with that confidence, I would say, and lack of. And it's almost like, why is that? And, women in tech, you probably know that as well, as, advancing or being compared to and this, that, or the other.
So is confidence the thing that women, then when they start with this PitchNinjas training, the thing that they want to work on?
I would say for the most part, yes. If we were kind of to summarize, most everyone and why they're here, yes, to get better at their communication. But then, you kind of unravel it a little bit. And yes, it is these things that we tell ourselves. And why are these little voices? Or, why don't you like to speak in public? What's going on? And so we kind of then dig deep, and it could be this situation or that, and then you kind of think about it and you summarize it. And it's sort of that self-confidence that seems to be building up if we sort of theme everything together.
And in comparison to that, what topic do men bring to the table? Is it the same?
I think it's slightly different. They want to be able to get their message across in a much more succinct way. And, we get a lot of people in sales coming in. Private equity, we're working with quite a lot, or in finance. And it's like their sales pitch. How do you get it much better? How do you get it more concise? How do you tell that story to just captivate the audience? And so there seems to be more dynamic sort of work in that they're not saying, oh, I'm not confident, or I need to work on this, or imposter syndrome, or being taken seriously, or the voice. It's, how do I get that message to land where I need it when I need it? Can I get some help with that? And so that's kind of seems to be the theme with them. It's not like they're telling us, I find it hard, this, that, or the other. It's, how do I get that much better? How do I get more succinct? And then when in tech with men, it's mainly what I've seen is, okay, we're subject matter experts, back to the point of how do I then communicate that to an audience that's non-tech? They find it quite difficult to get the jargon out, to get all that sort of talk that's maybe some people that are not experts in that area don't understand. So it's kind of shifting that mindset into something a bit easier, right? I always say, well, think about, imagine if you're explaining it to a child. How would you explain that concept? And then it's suddenly like, oh yeah, okay. Very simple, right? Yeah. The simpler you do it, the less words you use, the less time you use, it's going to land.
Oh, interesting. My coach did an exercise with me where he explained the different personality types. So if you're like output focused, or if you're sunny yellow and like to be complimented and stuff. And I don't know, I think I came up with a presentation, and then I had to talk to the one person, or a made up use case or something, and I had to talk to the red person and be like efficient and output oriented, and then to talk with the yellow person in a very, very different way. And that was also very interesting. So not based on your background, but based on what communication you prefer.
Yeah. And it's a powerful sort of framework to have, right? Because we're all human. We all like to be communicated in a certain way. The more you understand and know yourself, the better it gets. So, I know I have my tendencies. I know how I like to be communicated, especially in our meetings with teams. It's like structure, quick, like tangents kill me. And my co-founder, if she listens to this, she'll know. But, it's like, I'm like, wait, we haven't finished at this point. And it's going to get me all if we want, let's park that, but like, let's go through these points, because then we end up not doing what we need to do in this half hour. And I don't, and I'm like, I'm a stickler for time as well. So, but then again, how do you like to be communicated with? And that not only goes verbal, but I think it's important to think about written as well.
Yeah,
so
true.
And that's maybe a whole separate conversation, but it goes along the same sort of techniques and tips we've been talking about here. But written is important to think about too.
True.
Maybe if we go full circle back to the beginning, and now we talked about, okay, how do you like to be communicated to, how other people like to be communicated to? Ellen, you were talking about mental health, about your mental health in this case in the beginning. Lucero, how would you say communication helps with your mental health? Like also maybe being aware of, okay, this is how I like to be communicated to, and this are clear lines of where I say, okay, not like this.
Yeah, I mean, great point, right? Mental health, and I think we're getting more open about it. Certainly when I started my career, it was like nothing ever was said, or it was taboo, or we didn't even think about it. And so, I mean, for my journey, since I left the corporate world, it's been a roller coaster, because I haven't experienced it. Being in a corporate role, you're comfortable, you don't have these, you leave the work at the door, and then you come in, and I had all these things on the personal side, and then got back to work. Holidays were holidays. Now it's a completely different story. And so how do you manage that? And, communication, if we're, talking about this subject, is, who am I speaking to? How do I voice that to who? And who are my allies? And a lot of times, like, because I've been trained in coaching, I self-coach, which is helpful. But there comes a point where I can only just talk to myself so much and resolve my own issues. And who do I have in front of me, around me? So, co-founder, great example, sharing. We don't see each other every day, but we are talking. If you have mentors or a network, I'm thinking network of other founders who are in my situation, for example. We could all find sort of our network of who is doing similar to us, be it colleagues or in the work setting, being friends, perhaps from a personal perspective, and communicating. And I think it's important to note, you're not just communicating the happy things. I think sometimes you may have friends that just kind of want to hear the positives, and or people, colleagues that just kind of don't want to go to the negative because it's a downer, it's a bummer. And so I think it's important to just be real. So if it's a failure, if they're vulnerable that morning, I mean, sometimes I get these bouts in the morning where I feel like, am I depressed? No. Or, you got to know, and then that suddenly knocks me back. And I think it's personal. So mistakes, fears, failures, anything that crops up, imposter syndrome. No, that vulnerability, I think, is important to communicate and be open. So apologies if I'm a little bit sharp. Maybe I just need some time, or just help me. Can we talk it out? And then having that person, like for me, it's my co-founder. And, there was a moment, I think end of February, where we were waiting for a contract to be signed, a big one that would determine if we would fundraise or not. And it wasn't coming through. And then I was like, I think I was getting out of bed at like 10 a.m. every morning for like 3 days. And I'm like, I'm depressed. What's going on? And then I eventually talked to her at the end of the week. And I'm like, I was in a real down. Like I took it, because I spent so much time on this, that I took it to heart. And it was just, and then she was like, oh, you should have told me sooner. And I was like, I don't know. I just bottled it up. And I was just like, at moments I remember we met midweek, and I was super sharp with her. And I was just like, kind of like, you made a mistake here. And it's like, oh, sorry, I was just having this moment. So that's real, right? And be able to communicate the ups and the lows, I think, is important, in voicing that.
Yeah, for me, it's also super important what you said, be real and not hide it. Because I think in a very old corporate world, it was like, oh, no emotions at work at all. and you were not allowed to talk about personal stuff. But personal stuff is so important, and also sharing vulnerabilities with your colleagues is also makes your communication stronger, not weaker. I had an emotional intelligence workshop, and they were like, oh yeah, and you have to keep your emotions in check. And I was like, do I? Because of course, like I can't like bubble them out all the time, but communicating them clearly and also being aware of them and saying, okay, this is how I feel today. And then also maybe raising that. I think it's super important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also to normalize that topic helps also because, I mean, many people think that it's not professional to bring your emotions to work, but they are there with you. They influence what you do at work. They influence your performance. They influence to what you say yes, to what you say no. So it's professional to be able to deal with them at work and to communicate them in a proper way. I think one thing is if you shut up about them and you just don't talk about it, it's like in your example, one day you just explode and treat someone unfair. So that's not really helpful. And I think that talking about them in portions helps to not have such a big bang when talking or dealing with your emotions. And on the other side, also, if the person that you share your emotions with is overwhelmed or doesn't have the capacity to talk about them, I think it's fair to first of all say, no, sorry, I can't listen to your personal emotions right now. Please talk to XYZ. Or what I tend to ask myself is, or ask the person I want to share them with is, hey, is it okay with you if I talk about my emotion? Just to do a check-in if the other person can consume them.
Yeah.
Same for mental health as well, right? So we were saying emotions, but also mental health. I don't know if you can say, please correct me here, if that's a version of how you communicate mental health in a way, just in a...
Yeah, I think so, right? We're talking about emotions. We're talking about having hard days, having a hard time. It could be, the timeline could be longer than a day or two, and you're going through some stuff personally, right? That's going to be difficult. So I think there's that self-awareness again. And I certainly think about this a lot and I'm getting better. And I think it's a great way to think about if I do have this negative thought or emotion creep up because I read something on social media, right? In LinkedIn, and some founder raised this much money or a similar field to us. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we haven't done anything. And so you start to get this whole feeling of like failure. What are we not doing, this, that, or the other? I'm like, boom, emotion. Why am I thinking this? Get rid of it. And so I analyzed, I was like, why did this come up? Oh, because I read this article. And so why do I feel this way? And can I get rid of it? Okay. And can we park it? Okay. Or, any other thing that crops up, a no, like I mentioned before, not taking it personally. It's not because we failed the pitch or that. It's just because they don't have budget or that. So I think it's good practice if it comes up to acknowledge it, to ask, and then to kind of park so that it doesn't, which it was happening to me, ruin my day in a way. And even my personal life, where I was then getting snappy with the children when they would come home from school, and they're like, are you in a bad mood? And I get more stuff. I'm not in a bad mood. Why are you saying that? My husband's like, your attitude has really changed since you started this company. I'm like, because I'm trying to earn money, right? So I'm like, okay, it's true. Like my emotions are, I need to like just kind of be more self-aware and catch them. It's almost like catching, kind of bundling them and going, off you go. Or if it's really serious, like, why am I really this way? What's going on? Talking about it, like you said, with someone.
Yeah, that's true. And I think one thing that I still try to find my way with is this balance between sharing and maybe also oversharing, like sharing too much, sharing too less. Where is it enough to be self-aware of my emotions? And where's the point that I want to share it with someone, or where I maybe even overshare?
Yeah, it's a great question. You just made me think of if I was thinking that, it's like, how much is this emotion bothering me and how much is it lingering there for that's impeding me getting on the laptop or, things like that. If it's kind of lingering, then it's kind of a sign to share it with someone, maybe someone close to you. Again, I'm thinking of my co-founder, or I'm thinking, of a close friend, just to quickly go for a walk and share some of this, as opposed to perhaps, if it's something that, I can kind of self-manage. Okay, I'm going to park it. I'm self-aware, but I can move on and continue my day with my emails and not be in a crappy mood. Then we kind of move on. So it's kind of almost like the spectrum of, is it lingering with you for more than a few hours a day, more than 2 days, and then you get like snarky with that person on day 3. Then it's like time to talk. Versus, okay, something quick that happened, but I've parked it. I'm not reading social media. That has nothing to do with me. You never know what's going on behind the scenes. I tell myself, this is all like glorified sometimes on LinkedIn or Instagram, and moving on.
Yeah, I think it's a journey. We are all learning.
So true. And if you out there want to learn more about communication and how to pitch better or how to hold better presentations, then we're going to link you PitchNinjas and how you can sign up for their trainings. We hope that this episode also gave you some tips and some insights. As a last note, Ellen also wrote a blog post she quickly wanted to advertise.
Yes, exactly. Because I wrote about these no-brainers that we were already talking about. So if you'd like to read some tips, you can, we already mentioned some of them, but if you'd like to also hear about PitchNinjas in a written form and read about the no-brainers and maybe also do a little exercise, you can just take a look at my blog. It's ellenschwartau.com, and there you find the PitchNinjas blog post with some no-brainer tips you can implement right now.
Lucero, thanks so much for talking to us. Thanks so much for being on our podcast. It was so interesting to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking about all of this. Hopefully it helps the audience, whoever's listening. And as Doreen and Ellen said, feel free to come have a visit. I do have office hours type of thing, if we call it that, 15-minute chats. They're free of charge, just to understand the process, get to know us. That's happening every week. So there's links on there in our Instagram, PitchNinjas, and our website as well, pitchninjas.com. So happy to have a chat with anyone who is a bit nervous and doesn't know what to do. Let's do it.
Thank you for your insights, and thank you for your great work.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for founding PitchNinjas, for all the not leadership talkers.
We're on a mission to help as many people as possible communicate more effectively. So yeah, that means everyone. Thank you guys. Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, wir freuen euch sehr, euch heute Lucero vorstellen zu können. Warum?
I wanted to say tits. Unmuted. Mit Elton
und Dodo, unser Podcast von und mit Frauen aus der IT.
Wir, das sind Elton und Dodo, erzählen euch in unserem Podcast von unseren Erfahrungen, Frauen in der IT zu sein, und unterhalten uns auch mit anderen Frauen aus der IT. Es geht um Herausforderungen, Tipps und Tricks und auch die ein oder andere Anekdote. Thematisch sind wir ziemlich breit aufgestellt. Es geht auch um Produktentwicklung, Agile Coaching, aber auch in der IT geht es in die Tiefe der Programmiersprachen, Data Science oder auch verwandten Themen wie dem Green Coding.
Wir wollen Frauen ein Sprachrohr verleihen, weil Frauen gehören in STEM-Felder. Und mit unserer Präsenz wollen wir dies untermauern und auch andere Frauen motivieren, sich mit dem Thema IT zu beschäftigen, in das Thema einzusteigen und vielleicht auch ihre Leidenschaft dafür zu finden.
Hört rein in unsere verschiedenen Folgen, gebt uns Feedback und gerne auch Anregungen. Ihr findet uns auf Instagram und Twitter, unmute_it, und natürlich auf allen Plattformen, auf denen es Podcasts gibt.